Okay, so in Parak Lamed Tes, Pashas V'Yeshiv, Posuk, Yud Aleph. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the Ikar, one point from Pasuk Yud Aleph. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ahi ke hayom hazeh vayovei habayis alasis malachtoi ve'ein ish me'anshe habayis shom ba'bayis. So we noted last week the repeated stress on the fact that this is taking place in a bias. Came into the house and no man of the household was there in the house. And this is something we noticed in the past in this whole parasha. There's this theme of the bias, which is where there's a bracha, and where Yosef was in charge of the bias. But this pasuk specifically, there's a stress that, okay, something's happening in the bias. So the question is, well, maybe Yosef doesn't, that suggests that perhaps Yosef doesn't belong in the bias. Now, why would you argue that Yosef doesn't belong in the bias? Well, Yosef was put in charge of the bias. But the strange thing happens in Pasuk Hey, which is the Birkas Hashem, is B'chol Asher Yesh Loi, bias ubasod. That's where there's mention of something besides the bias. Until then, it's always discussions about the bias, as in Pasuk Beis. He's Beveis Adonov, and he's Pasuk Daled, puts him in charge of Beisai. Pasuk Hey, he's in charge of Beisai, and there's a blessing on the Beis Hamitzri, and then Babayis Ubasod. So, and now we have this pasuk that, there's something going on, something rotten in the bias, right? So then you can read that as perhaps Yosef doesn't belong in the bias, and that makes perfect sense, because if Yosef, when he's in the bias, achieves that there's a bracha in the Sada too, so he doesn't have to do his malacha in the bias, he could do malacha in the Sada, right? Just showing that it might be this idea.
Be an overseer in the southern.
And everything, and the whole estate will
have a bracha anyway.
Yosef just has to find a place to do something, and then everything else will follow, right? He just has to be somewhere. So
maybe he has to be in charge.
Right. Okay, so this is in fact the case that there's this idea that Yosef belongs outside, not inside, and in the sud instead of the bias. So let me show you, there's a lot of psukim in Mishlei tonight. Mishlei will start, this is the pasuk, it says it explicitly. Mishlei Perek Chof Dalid, pasuk Chof Zayin. Mishlei Perek Chof Dalid, pasuk Chof Zayin states the following. Hochein bachutz melachtecha, prepare your malacha bachutz. Va'atida, basode loch. Atida is a verb from asid, so like also to prepare. Prepare it out in the sode. Achar uvanisa veisecha. After that is when you should build your house. So you should do malacha bachutz in the Sada, and then go to the bias. Hachin mechutz balachtecha. Yosef goes into the bias lasis balachtecha. So I'm going to show you that this pasuk is a response to Yosef. Yosef, who was going into the bias lasis balachtecha, should have, if he wants to build his bias, right? Because there's a whole major theme about Yosef, base Yosef, as we'll see. Mm-hmm. If he wants to build his bias, he has to first be bachutz, first be basada. And here he's doing something wrong by being in the house. What?
Even his dream was him basada.
Exactly. We'll see. So that's the point. He has to start in the Sada. Right. So let me show you the context over here. Right. Very good. Let me show you the context over here and how we know it's talking about Yosef. The psukim prior to this talk about the one who's mechiach in pasuk Chaf Hey. One who gives toichacha will have a noyam, and a bracha of good will come upon them. And so Saim Yishak Meshav Dvarim Nechoichem, which is like Techacha. So Yosef was zeicha to Alpicha Yishak Kalami, because he was Meishiv Dvarim Nechoichim, and he was Mechiach Eishes Beitifar. And as we mentioned, I think we mentioned this last week, even though he should not have been Marbet Dvarim with her, so that's a problem. But at the same time, the things he was saying were true things, Dvarim Nechoichim, and it was Techacha. And therefore he does earn the Birchas Taiv, you know, that's what he did has, obviously a good element and a negative element. He gets the Birchas Taiv, which is elsewhere in Mishlei called Birchas Hashem Hi Ta'ashir V'la Yosef Etzev Ima, as we discussed. And then right to the next pasuk there in Mishlei, Perchav Dalet, pasuk Chav Zayin is the pasuk of Hachem V'chutz Malachtecha, and then pasuk Chav Ches and Chav Tes say, don't testify against your friend, and don't say I'll do to him like he did to me. That picks up further in the Yosef story with Eishes Potiphar that he didn't say, and she went ahead and said something, slandered him, but he didn't say anything against her, and didn't return to her in kind. Okay, so let's see what does this have to do with Yosef. In other words, what exactly is the claim against Yosef that he's supposed to be first bachotz? So firstly, the fact that, okay, after your bachotz and after you're in the Sada, then you build the bayis. So as I mentioned, there's a whole theme about Beis Yosef. Many times it's called the Tanakh Beis Yosef, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't see it a lot of times. I didn't count. I mean, it's clearly significant, this idea of Beis Yosef. And it starts in Bereshis, where there's a palace of Yosef, and the people, they come to Beis Yosef. And Yosef is always getting batim, right? He gets in charge of the Beis thing, Beis Potiphar, and then he's in the Beis HaSoyar, and then eventually this Beis Yosef. Is there something with Paroi too? Atati al-Basi, right? Atati al-Basi, right?
No,
yes.
Then it says Veishma Beis Paroi also mentioned.
It says Beis Paroi. Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. Veishma Beis Paroi. Right. But more importantly, is Atati al-Basi. Yosef is always getting in charge of the bias. Now, bias means like the supreme bias means being a king, having a kingdom. Let me show you that by none other than Yeravam. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeravam is in Melachim Aleph, Perak Yud Aleph. Psukim Chav Tes. Let's look at those psukim. We should really start from Chav Ches. Melachim Aleph, Perak Yud Aleph, Pasuk Chav Ches talks about how Yeravam was a Gibar Chayil. And Shlomo saw that the Nar was an Oisei Melacha. Aha, he's an Oisei Melacha, so Vayifked Oisei l'chol Sevel Beis Yosef. So he's a good worker, so he gets a Pekida of Sevel Beis Yosef. It's an important term, let's remember that. And what happens then? Achia goes out, Yeravam goes out of Yishlayim, and Achia Shlomo finds him, and he's in the Sadeh, right? Shnei Levadim Bas Sadeh. And we spoke about this. Yosef was also found in the Sadeh when he was on his way to perhaps become king, but it didn't work, right? Here is when his descendant is discovered by Achia Shiloni.
Possibly Yaakov knew this, that he sent him to find his brother Basad, right?
No.
But he didn't say Basad.
Right.
He went to find him with the sign that they'll be in the sun.
Mm-hmm. Right, perhaps.
Maybe because of the dream.
Right. Yeah, definitely because of the dream. We'll see. Right, we'll get back to that soon. Right, so here it's corresponding to the Yosef story, meaning Yosef went out to, and it was Taya Basada, and it didn't work out for him to become king. Here, Yeravam goes out to the Sada, and Achia finds him. And also there's about the clothing, right? He has special clothing. Yeravam, he's wearing a Samach Hadasha, and it gets ripped, and the Navi rips it. But the point is that he tells him he's going to be king, and if you go forward to Perik Lamed Ches, he tells him, Banisi l'cha bayis nemon. Kasher Banisi the David. I'm going to build a bias Neman for you. So building like a dynasty, right? To build a bias in its ultimate form is for a person to found a dynasty. So
Neman specifically.
Right, true. Yeah, bias Neman is a lasting dynasty.
Yeah.
But to build a bias is used to be in a dynasty, have a dynasty in general. Kasher Banisi the David. And in other places it says clearly. Okay, so fine. So again, so what happens in the Yeravam story? There's a Sadeh, he finds him in the Sadeh, and then he promises him a bias. Yosef is told, and I maintain in Mishlei, that first be in the Sadeh, then be in the bias, right? So Yosef, going back, as you mentioned, Yosef had a dream. He was B'Seich HaSadeh. And then he was Toya Basada. He was Toya Basada. So on the one hand, he has a dream. So he's going to be the Sada person, right? We mentioned this in the beginning of Vayeshev. He's going to be the Sada person, but then Toya Basada indicates that whatever the Sada represents in the dream, Yosef wasn't there yet, right? Okay, so Yosef apparently needs to have a Sada before a bias, right? Achia, Yeravam had the Sada and the bias. Yosef doesn't have the Sada for the bias. What this all means, we'll soon see. We'll soon see exactly what it means. Now, I want to say one more Zushtel and then we'll get to what it means. Something about the base Yosef is in Parshas Miketz. In Perek Mem Gimel, Pasuk Tezayin, Yosef tells the Asher al Beisai, Have es Anashim HaBaisa, V'tuech Tevach V'hachin. Bring the people into the bias and V'hachin. And they were very afraid that they were brought into the bias, right? Because maybe Yosef is out to get them. And Yosef says, no, don't worry, I'm not going to, it's all good, right? Al Tiro. So, just a two-step to the pasuk in Mishlei where it says Hachim b'chutz v'lachtecha v'atul b'asad achar b'nisa v'secha. So here it says he brought them into the bias of Yosef and he was meichin tvech tevach v'hachim. And when he had them and he could have repaid them for what they did to him by selling him, right? There in Mishlei it says don't be an eid chinam. Don't make up stories about them, basically, that they're stealing, because it's really, they didn't steal. And don't say, here's where Yosef is not repaying in kind. Again, that's in Perek Chav Daled, Pasuk Chav Chesed. Right? Alti eid chinam b'reyecha, v'havitisa b'sasecha. Ashalam lo kefalei. So there's what's happening. Yosef is, there's where Yosef Taka has the bias, and he's meichin, and he brings him into the bias, and he doesn't take the opportunity to be an eid chinam, showing that he's not going to pay them. He's not going to repay them as they did to him. Okay. So let's go further. Look at the next pasuk in Mishnah. Now we're going to understand what this is all about. Go to the next pasuk in Mishnah, right there where you are. Right after that pasuk. So what do we have so far in Mishnah? Starting from in Perek Chav, starting from pasuk Chav Hey, talks about the one who's mechiach gets the bracha of Toiv. So Saim Yishak. All these things happen to Yosef. You have to first be outside, first be in the Sada, don't do the malacha in the bias, basically, right? Yosef went into the bias to do his malacha. Achar banisa v'secha, then you're going to get your dynasty. Don't be an eid chinam, and don't repay in kind. Now let's look at Pasuk Lamed. Al stei ish otzel avarti, v'al kerem adam chasar leiv. Here's a different kind of Sada. We just spoke about Pasuk Chav Zayin about the work that has to be done in the Sada. First prepare your Sada and then build your house. Now we're talking about a Sada that's rejected, right? The otzel, he just wants a bias because that's the place where you rest. He doesn't prepare his field. So what happens to his field? It becomes all thorny, and I take a lesson. It grows with thorns and gets overgrown with thorns, and I can take a lesson from that. The lesson is ma'at sheinos, ma'at tlumas. Don't sleep a lot. Right? If you don't sleep a lot, then everything you're lacking is going to come. Is just going to come marching towards you. I think that's what it literally means. Ishmaged, a shield person, has to come to your aid, your shield man. You go, boom, whenever you need him, he comes. So if you don't, as long as you don't sleep, right? And we had that pasuk about all you need to do is wake up in the morning. What was that pasuk again? There was a pasuk like that in Mishnah, remember?
Yeah.
Just open your eyes.
Right. So I think it's Ishmaged. It's like.
It means it will come marching towards you. I just meant to explain it. But basically, whatever you're lacking,
you need,
be like that. It'll be right there. Right. I'm just trying to remember that pasuk about. All you have to do is psach pichos ba'alecha or something, right? Psach inecha.
Yeah.
Psach inecha, right? So all you have to do is open your eyes. Okay. We have to go back to that pasuk and see if there might be something to learn from that. Can't find it now. Oh, it's in Perek Chav pasuk Yud Gimel. Al tehab sheina pentivarish bekach inecha savalach. Right. Okay. So So basically, as long as you don't sleep, everything will be fine, right? The same lesson. Chaf Yud Gimel. Don't love to sleep. If you don't love to sleep, then everything's going to be fine. Just have to open your eyes. Now, so taking this idea in Mishnah Perek Dal, what it's saying is like this: you have to first be in the field, and then you could make the bias. If you neglect your field in favor of the bias, which means you don't want to work, you just want to relax. So then bad things happen, right? And it talks about the Steish Atzel and the Kerem Adam Chasar Lev. Remember this Chasar Lev? We had him in Perek Zayin. It's Yosef, right? The woman who tries to ensnare the Ve'er Babson Avina Babonim Na'ar Chasar Lev, Perek Zayin. Pasuk Zayin. The Na'ar Chasar Lev. And while Chochma calls to the Chasar Lev in Perek Tes, Pasuk Dalet, and it says Mi Pesi Osvarina, Chasar Lev Romelos. Everyone's trying to work on the Chasar Lev. The Isha tries to catch the Chasar Lev, and Chochma educates him.
He's no longer a Chasar Lev.
Right. To give him a Lev, exactly. Now, so the Atzel and the Adam Chasar Lev. So now we have a clue over here. Yosef is the person who's struggling with Chasar Lev. Is he going to grow up, and is he going to get educated or not? One of the problems of the Chasar Lev is that he's an Atzel, as it says here in Perek Dalet. So now it's very, very simple. What does the pasuk say over here in Mishnah? It says, "Oh, look at the Atzel. His whole thing gets neglected. All he has to do is not sleep, right?" This is a major taina against Yosef. Don't sleep so much.
Because he's a dreamer?
He's a dreamer. What does it say about dreamers?
He's supposed to sleep so he gets things anyway.
That's the problem. Wait. What does it say about dreamers?
Depending where. One place it says they don't do well. The other place says that they.
Yeah, let's see. Right in Tehillim Perek Kuf Chav Zayin, it says Shlomo Melech is very in favor of sleep. He's the one who slept late, right? And his father never slept. So Kuf Chav Zayin pasuk beis Shav lochem ashki mekom achrei shavas oichle lechem ha'atzavim. Kain liteli dida sheda. Shlomo the Shia Masa Shlomo. Shlomo is called Yedidya. And he could sleep. He says, "Oh, you guys get up early, stay up late. You have lechem of struggle." And Yedidai could get sleep. And then he talks about Banim and Bnei Hanurim. Probably something about the fact that he's his father's son and he's different than his father, something like that. And he could be different. He could be lazy, and he could appreciate sleep. Okay, because Hashem doesn't build a house. Hashem builds a house. No work is worthless, right? Work doesn't accomplish anything. I know Pasuk Aleph doesn't say that. I think you made that point last time I said this. But then this Pasuk Aleph, they were saying like it's not about the work, right? It's not about the work. No point in getting up early and staying up late. You could sleep. He literally says you could sleep. You could sleep, right? So he's basically saying, why not sleep? And like we said, right, because the dreamers, the best things in the greatest accomplishment in Yosef's life happened when he was sleeping. The same thing in Shlomo's life. So, okay. So basically, the argument about the Atzel who rejects his Sadeh and he neglects his Sadeh and the Sadeh gets overgrown with weeds, and really he should learn the lesson of not sleeping. This is a good argument against Yosef. Now, one second, don't let me finish. It is and it isn't. What do I mean? Why is he an Atzel? Or let's put it this way. Why does Shlomo advocate sleep? He says why. Because what do I need Lechem HaTzavim for? Birchas Hashem hi tashir.
Doesn't matter.
V'lo Yosef etzev ima, right?
Yeah.
He's getting around the etzev.
Right.
Dreams are the way to get around the etzev. So, okay. So Yosef, but there's a problem with that. Meaning like this. If you have no etzev issue, if etzev is not a problem for you because you have the Birchas Hashem. So again, the pasuk says in Mishlei very good. Birchas Hashem hi tashir. Yosef etzev ima. So Yosef has a way to get out of be'it savim teichalena, and that's with the Birchas Hashem, and that's amazing. That's wonderful, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that then you have no need to work, and then you could be an atzel.
And then you can work in the house only.
Yeah, then you're in the house because you don't appreciate. Because a sad is a place for malacha. So this is the dark side of avoiding atzvos. Basically, no, what it made me realize is also, so Shlomo says, so that's what's happening to Yosef. The Birchas Hashem is with him, so he could be in the bias or the sada, right? He might as well be in the bias because what does he need to work for? He doesn't appreciate hard work. Oh, you don't appreciate hard work, then you run into atzlos. And basically, there's two things. There's lechem atzavim, that's what Shlomo Melech says, the bread of struggle. There's also something called lechem atzlos, as it said in Mishlei, right? Lechem atzlos eichel. So it's really, in a way, two pitfalls that relate to each other. Meaning, if you don't have struggle, you might have laziness. Right? Atzlos means struggle. It doesn't mean sadness. It means struggle. Yeah, I think
maybe the original context.
Right, the original context. At the bottom. It means it's going to be painful, it's going to be struggle, it's going to be something you're going to have to work through, right? Something like that. If you're saved from atzvos, then you could very easily fall into atzlos. So basically, it's a very fine line, and you have to actually work on the one hand.
You come from the same place.
One second, I'm going to explain the second one. Let me just finish. On the one hand, you have to appreciate malacha and want to create, want to do, but if it turns into being struggle, that's also not a good thing, right?
The problem is if everything's Birchas Hashem anyway, what is the work for?
It's a good question.
It has to be a different, so maybe it should be a different kind of work.
It's a good question.
But before Torah, what?
It's a good question. I'm going to get to that. I think what I'm going to address soon is say it. Now, could you explain before you said it's two? You said it's more than the same thing or something?
They both come from whatever. They're considered to come from the same natural.
What atzlos and atzlos?
Atzlos and atzlos. They're both heavy. They're both that part of the nature. They're different types of the nature or whatever. I don't know. The Gemara talk about four.
So you're talking about these sidus,
the
elements.
And they're both heavy.
Right. Both awful. Interesting. Okay, we have to think about that. Okay, so basically, Yosef gets past the lechem atzavim, and Shlomo Melech says how wonderful it is. You don't need lechem atzavim, but the risk of that is that you fall into lechem atzlos. Now you want to know, Shlomo, you ask me, what do you have to work if you have Hashem? We'll get to that soon. So what did Yosef require? So basically, Yosef has a problem here, that he's an atzel. And right, and that's a problem that Yosef would have because he's a dreamer. Dreamers nothing better for a dreamer than to have a lazy afternoon, take a nap. So, but he has to unlearn atzlos. So what does he need? The pasuk says in Tehillim what Yosef required to refine him. Inu bakevel ragloi, barzel ba'nafshoi, ad by dvarei imras Hashem by eis dvarei imras Hashem tzarfas. Right?
Yeah.
He had to suffer, and that we have also in the Lavatzech Gizos La'asaf. Hasiroisi b'sevel shechma. Right? When Yosef got out, he got out of sevel. Yeravam, remember back in Malachim, Shlomo says, oh, he's a person of malacha, so he's mafkin him al sevel beis Yosef. And that prepares him to be king, because the next thing you know, he becomes king. So he's the one. Sevel's work, right? So he gets nifkad on malacha, and Sevel, Yosef is doing malacha, but he opts for the bias malacha, right?
And I don't know if he was given that, but maybe.
No, but that's saying the pasuk is saying he shouldn't have come into the house. Maybe he should have done to the other based on that pasuk in Mishlei. Maybe he was given the bias because he likes. No, maybe he's given bias because he liked bias, whatever. I don't know.
Maybe he could have said something.
Yeah.
He probably could have said anything.
Once the bracha is either way, he could have just probably done anything, right? No one cares. What do you mean? He's v'yazav kashalav yad Yosef, so he could choose probably where he hangs out, I guess. But anyways, right? Yeah, that's the detail. So what was I saying? That that Yeravam is on the sevel of Beis Yosef. That's what you need. Kids have to learn sevel in order to get the bias. First, have to learn sevel. I'm going to explain to you exactly what it means soon, a little bit more, and I think we'll get to your question about what does he have to work for. Yosef runs achutz in pasuk Yud Beis, right? There you go, because hachin bachotz melachtecha. That's where he should have been. He should have been bachotz. Now I want to show you that chachma. Remember, chachma is the alternative to Isha Zaras. Now we're going to learn some Sukkim Mishlei. I'm show you that chachma does it in the right sequence, meaning it starts bachotz and then it gets you to the bias. Starts in Mishlei Perek Aleph pasuk Chaf. That's the first call of chachma. Chachma is bachotz tarayna. So Chachma is called out bachotz, okay? And then we get to the next call of Chachma, which is in Perek Ches. We spoke about Perek Zayin, Ches, and Tes, and its connections to Yosef, right? So in Perek Ches, Chachma calls, here in Pasuk Beis, it's Berosh Miroimim Ale Derech. Bachutz Ale Derech, Beis Nesivos, I don't know what Beis Nesivos is actually, look at the Ad Sha'arim. And then go to the end of Pasuk, the end of Perek Ches, I'm sorry, the beginning of Pasuk Tes, Perek Tes, Chachma is Bansa Beisa. Aha. So to build the bayis, the Chachma is going to build the bayis, as the pasuk says in Chav Daled Gimel, Ki b'Chachma yibana bayis, right? So if you want to build the bayis, the Chachma starts b'chutz, and then eventually it builds the bayis. While the Isha, and that's, remember at the end of Perek Ches over there, it says, listen to Chachma, because if you listen to Chachma, you find Chaim, you get Ratzon Hashem, and as you spoke, as opposed to the Isha Ra, right, that's in order to find the Isha Tov, meaning in order to have the right bayis, you have to start b'chutz, and the Chachma starts b'chutz. Again, I'm going to explain to you exactly, I think, what this all means. What exactly Chachma has to do with working, and why do you have to work if you could just be saying Hashem. We'll get to that soon. The Isha Zara, look in Perek Zayin, the Isha Zara, as it says in Pasuk Vav, in Zayin, she looks out for the Nar Chasar Lev. Look at the Pasuk Yud Aleph says, she doesn't stay in her house. She doesn't stay in her house. That's the problem. Lo yishkenu ragleha, and she entraps the nar, right? And she attracts him to come to her bias. And as that parak ends, darchei shoel beisa. Her bias is darchei shoel. So that means like this: the isha zara is supposed to stay in the home, but she goes out b'chutz. Pam b'chutz, pam b'chayvis. She goes out to the chutz. Really, we'd rather she stays home. The nar chasar leiv could get trapped by her and go into the house, which is darchei shoel beisa. In order to get to the bias, you have to first start b'chutz.
Build it yourself.
Build it with chachma, right? Yeah. Now I want to explain to you what I think that all means. Bias is menucha, where things are right, correct? So there's two kinds of menucha. There's a menucha that comes after you work through what it takes to get there, and that's the menucha that comes after chachma. The chachma calls that b'chutz, meaning you don't have the end goal. Chachma starts b'chutz because you have to get there. You have to get to the menucha. Chachma says, don't think you're at the menucha. Don't try to take a shortcut to the menucha. Try to build something, a business, a life, such that the bias will be based on something worthwhile. And that bias makes some sense.
I mean, don't try to get it right away. Plan it out properly. Do it carefully and slowly, and work for something. Build it up. Then you'll have a bias, and it'll be good.
Right, but also it's more than that. I think it's that the menucha, a menucha that's a result of chachma, is the right kind of menucha. I think that's the nekuda. In other words, if you have even if you'll get the menucha without the chachma, that's the isha zara. It's going to be the wrong kind of matzah because it's not informed by wisdom. It wasn't created by anything wise. It's just you got lucky. So you buy a lottery ticket and you get the menucha. Okay, that's isha zara. Why? Because there's no right. There's no
so the work is by definition the wise work because the work gives them wisdom.
I think so. Yeah, exactly. I think so. The wisdom, what's the wisdom is necessary to know how to live, meaning you know how to work, to know how to create, to know how to produce. I think so. I think that.
And you know what to value.
Right. I think that the work and the wisdom is the same thing.
So this is the difference between the rich person who worked his way up and his children who don't know what everything means.
Yeah. The rich person had to be on the outside, figuratively, and therefore he had to think and had to look for value. Now, sometimes you look for non-value, whatever. But in an ideal world, you had to think about, okay, how can I create something of value? And that's chachma, and then chachma will take you from the outside into the bias. The isha who's in the bias and should stay in the bias, but sometimes she comes out of the bias. Meaning, really, is supposed to get there. Sometimes she comes out of the bias to lure him in before it's time for him to come, and that's darchei shoel.
Whereas the king, according to Dharma, the king has to work because he's building.
And the fact is that
the Bnei Melachim don't work. That's not a great thing. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. It's not a great thing. Yosef doesn't want to work. He's Taya Basada, and Shlomo. Well, Shlomo has his Shamalas. He says you can sleep, but
Shlomo has a special bracha. in any case,
but Shlomo also had to worry about the Ishazar. No, but it's not shver. It's not shver. Shlomo had to worry about the Ishazar. He slept late with Bas Pari. It would be very nice. Shlomo sleeps late. Yeah, but it was Bas Pari they were sleeping late with in the legend, right?
It turns out a problem.
Yes, I'm saying on the one hand we have this Mizmor of Shlomo talking about it's okay to sleep, and this is on. I remember I told you this is obviously about the Beis Hamikdash because he says Hashem built the house. Don't think I built the house, and it's okay to sleep. This is he slept late. And the keys of the Beis Hamikdash are under his pillow, and it's like oh whatever, it's not my house anyway. What does that have to do with me? Kilu, it's an apology. I'm saying it's Kilu an apology for that, right? But obviously there was something wrong with that too, and in fact it is associated with Bas Pari. So it's not a steer.
In the end, he has a failure. In that
right. So it's not a contradiction. There's a midah of Sheina. And that's taking the midah of Birchas Hashem to its extreme and saying Etzev is Mandachar Shmei. But the problem with that is you don't have Chachma and you don't have Atzlos, so you can get the Ishazara.
And in Mishlei, one of his three Sifrei Chachma, he says the opposite. He says
right, wake up, open your eyes. Right. So as we said, that's Moshe Shlomo ben David, right? There he's speaking as he's talking about his father's education. Now you see the Avi, the whole thing is about right.
My father told me.
Right, and Ben Chacham Yisam Chav. So let's say looking at it even this way is correct, which is undoubtedly correct. Yosef is Yosef as an individual, but he's also the son of Yaakov, and he has to do things as Ben Yaakov. And Shlomo is what Shlomo represents as himself, and that's Shir Masa Shlomo. Here's my angle, but there's also things that I am because I'm the Ben David. That by the way, it's just a very interesting insight that I mean, in as much as a person is his own person and also the son of his father, if he's doing things right, then there could be
conflict, but you have to make sure you have to.
No, I'm saying but I mean to say in terms of Pirush Psukim and Steers, it's like no, this is Shlomo as Kwa Shlomo, and that's Shlomo Kwa the fact that he's Ben David, and
so sometimes he's doing one, sometimes he's doing the other. Right,
and he has to probably do both, and there has to be a blend. And same thing with Yosef. So Yosef is the he has to become a Ben Chacham to be Mesamech as Aviv, right?
Right.
But he has a tendency to be an Atzel.
But that wasn't good at all.
What?
The only part that's good is the dreaming.
Well, listen. You can't.
There's a part.
Right. There is a part that's good. You can't. Look, if you're very into atzvos, right? So you're not going to be lazy. You're always going to be struggling. But you're going to have these dreams. I mean, there's two different meters. Yeah.
But then there's the side that David is the Navi.
So what?
So maybe he doesn't need dreams.
What are you saying? The what?
He doesn't need dreams.
It's a question if he's a Navi.
It's a question. If he is, then maybe not. I'm not arguing the point. He also had struggles in his life. It's clear. But even the base. But I wanted to point out, even the base Yosef is compared with the base Yaakov.
Right. So therefore, what?
So part of the base Yosef is built on base Yaakov.
Right.
That's the point to make.
Right.
Even the bias that he built.
He's about to get a value. Beis Yosef, look at Beis Yosef. Even Beis Yosef is only such as a extension of Beis Yaakov. Right, very good.
And the one who says it, but the pasuk is from Vimad, right? So he's the one who comes from the outside who can look in and see this. Okay, maybe I'm almost there.
Okay, I wanted to do a few more psukim about this idea. One is very interesting, just to speculate a little bit. If you look in Mishlei Perek Yud, Pasuk Chavav, to remind you, last week, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, we showed how the Psukim Yud Ches through Chav Gimel were all about Yosef who's speaking too much. And you have to choose your words, and otherwise you're going to die by Chasar Leiv, right? And you're not going to get the Birchas Hashem, you're not going to get the Birchas Hashem, which doesn't have Etzev. And the Ksil Maitu Zima, if you worry about the Zima, could skip Pasuk of Dalad, but go to Pasuk and Chafei, look at Pasuk Chavav. It talks about the Atzel l'Sholchav, Kachoymetz l'Shinayim, v'Cha'asham l'Inayim, Kein ha'Atzel l'Sholchav. Yaakov sent Yosef, Eishlacheu me'emek Chevron. Didn't come back, it didn't work. Why? He was Toya Basadeh. Toya Basadeh is Atzlos. Because here you're the Basech Hasadeh. So you're the bread person. Well, bread, okay, you're going to get around lechem atzvos because you could have bread in a dream. There's no atzvos, but then there's lechem atzvos. Yeah. So you have to, that's basically the balance. And then Yiras Hashem Taisef Yomim is because
it's just kind of
right, and and also that Yosef himself he's a lekim aniyare, and also here he said v'chatasi lekim. So on the one hand he's doing something wrong because he's atzel, he's in the bias, but on the other hand he's going to become
wise.
Yeah, and he becomes wise, of course.
And then he's not an atzel.
right? We have to see.
He's running things from the bias.
Yeah, he's running things.
From the bias as
yeah, he's running
sort of
things.
king.
He's working. Yeah.
I wanted to point out that this whole thing about bias being king, Pari is.
Of course, Pari means bias. I mentioned that last time. And then here is another raya gedayla to this whole thing. Look in Kehelas Perak Yud. Also psukim that we dash in the psukim right before. This happens all the time. That we dash in the psukim, and then we see, the next pasuk is also all about it. In Kehelas Perak Yud, starting from pasuk Yud Aleph, it talks about this. Ein Yisroin the Bal Haloshin, right? Bal Haloshin doesn't get anything, and the Pi Chacham, how the Pi Chacham talks and how the Ksil talks, and the Sachal is Mar B'dvarim, and therefore he doesn't know what's coming in the future. And then Malak Sidim gets a gear, doesn't know where to go, and the king can't be a nar, the king has to be free, right? Big Vur will see. Next pasuk about Altayim Yimachamad Korev, B'Shiflus Yudayim Yidlef Habayis. With laziness, the roof caves in and leaks. So if you want to make a bias, the first thing is can't be Atzal, right? So that's Yosef who's destined to get base Yosef. And in charge of base Parai, he has to work out not speaking too much. That's what's going on. I'm thinking Kehelas, and also that's all time. And now I'll show you one more thing in Mishlei Perek Yudaleh, which the Tanchuma dashens about Yosef. In Mishlei Perek Yudaleh, pasuk of Gimel, it says, Yudaleh of Gimel, V'chol etzev yiyeh moisar, v'dvaras v'sayim achla machsar. Yudaleh of Gimel, V'chol etzev yiyeh moisar, v'dvaras v'sayim achla machsar. So in Kehelas it said, we just read the pasuk, Ein Yisroin the Bal Haloshin, right? And here it's also saying, Dvaras Hasayim doesn't get you a Yisroin. What gets Moiser? Etzev. And the Tanchuma Dash is on Yosef. Yosef, by suffering in jail, he got Moiser. He ended up with gaining.
Because he was an Otzel, he wasn't working hard enough, therefore he wasn't getting the wisdom, so he has to go to jail, and jail is always Etzev.
Right, exactly.
So he gains the benefit, and he becomes Chacham.
Until then, he was Dvaras Hasayim. Now, the Tanchuma says Dvaras Hasayim is that he said to Saramashkim, Kiyim Zechtani Itcha. I would have said Dvaras Hasayim is the fact that he spoke too much to Esh Latifa.
It's both the same thing.
Yeah, both. Yeah. Could be
100%
right. Could be Kiyim Zechtani Itcha. I think, did we say that? Did we show this? Kiyim Zechtani Itcha, that it's also a Ribudvan? No. I don't think we went to that. No.
It wasn't clear that it was.
Right. No, it wasn't clear that it was. We didn't go into that. No, I don't know that it was. Right. I don't know that it was.
Never say it. Right. We're not supposed to say anything.
Yeah, I don't know. Right, there's something I don't see that. Okay. Right. I don't see that.
Well, he does explain too much. He doesn't have to say
okay, perhaps. Fine.
Look,
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Because you're going to tell the guy, give him a mission to get someone out of jail. You have to explain.
You have to give him an argument to make.
More than that, how can I go tell Pi to you're a murderer and who knows what? I'm going to tell you that, no, chances I don't belong here.
Yeah, okay.
So I have a very good case and
good point. Yeah. So it's not clear.
Right. Okay, that's something to look into. I want to say one last thing. So Yosef is he was Toya Basada, right?
Yeah.
And that Toya Basada means he has this problem of acלות, and he can't turn into the shalom that he has to. And I forgot to mention earlier in Mishlei Perek Zayin, where it talks about at the end of Perek Zayin, we're telling the youth to stay away from the Isha. It says Va'ata banim shimuli. So we spoke about this. Yayim not listening to her, but listening to Chachma. And it says next pasuk Al yesh ador libecha al teisa b'nesiv. Don't be teisa. Don't wander b'nesiv. So Yosef has to avoid being toya basad. Okay. Yosef has to avoid being toya. Connected this, it says in Yeshaya Perek Chof Tes. We don't look at this in a long time, but in Yeshayahu, the end of Perek Chof Tes, it talks about those who hide from Hashem and think that Hashem doesn't see them, and they abuse the Avyoni Adam and Vayatu Batoyu Tzadik, right? Which we spoke about. That's they sold Yosef, and this is the end of Perek Chof Tes Nishai, and it says L'chein koyam Hashem Beis Yaakov. And let me jump ahead to Perek Lamed, where it talks about those who are going down to Mitzrayim without asking Hashem. That's what the Shvatim caused us to go down to Mitzrayim, and in a way of Hester upon it. Okay, right? I don't have to talk about
it. We have a double meaning.
What?
Okay.
No, meaning it was decreed for us to go down to Mitzrayim, but it happened
in the context of that
oh yeah, of course. Right, so Perikov Tes Pasuk Lamed Chav Beis, it says in Yishai, L'chein koyam Hashem al Beis Yaakov asher podas Avram, Loi ato yevesh Yaakov, Loi ato podav Yechavar. Now Yaakov is no longer going to be embarrassed. Ki, v'oisel yeladav ma'asa yodai b'kibur yakdishu shemi, when he sees his children, b'kdishu es Kadesh Yaakov is okay, so so this is talking about when Yaakov is reunited with his whole family. V'yadu sayei ruach bina, v'regnim yigmulu lekach. V'atachi ruach Yaakov aviyim, when he has his whole family together. V'oisel yeladav. And the toyei ruach get bina, because Yosef was toyeh, right? And now he's in Novin with Achri Hadia Lakim was called in Ruach, right? And Yesh as a Kurash Ruach Lakim Boy, right? So he has the Ruach, and his Ruach and Yaakov's Ruach are Talis Evazeh. Because Vatchi Ruach Yaakov only when he's. So when Yosef becomes. Right, right. It goes both ways. Right.
Well, because of Ruach, but they both.
Yeah, right. So when Yosef is Toya. Yeah, so he's Vilakach.
I don't know. The lekach is the bar lekach maybe.
Why?
No, maybe not. No.
So Yosef is the Toya Basadeh.
You take from it. I don't know.
Yosef is Toya Basadeh. Yosef is Toya Basadeh, and he has to be Al Tesav Seha. When he learns to get Bina and Ruach and Das, which is all the things Pari says, and then and Yaakov sees his children with, and then Yaakov also gets the Ruach too. And that's what Navi continues. He says, "Don't go to Mitzrayim v'lei ruchi. We could go to Mitzrayim with the Ruach Hashem, and you broke it all up by doing it this way, by selling Yosef, etc. It didn't have to end this way. Okay, that'll be all for you.